My father didn't just choose his new wife over me. He used my dead mother's memory as a weapon to force my obedience. That night, the words, "You're grounded until you apologize," echoed in our silent living room. I was 27 years old, yet my father treated me like a misbehaving child. I felt a mix of shock and anger, but deep down, I knew this was never really about a simple apology. The living room was lavish, filled with expensive furniture and artwork, luxuries I quietly paid for with my own earnings. The chandelier above cast a warm glow, but it did nothing to soften the coldness in my father's eyes. Sterling Vance, my father, stood stiffly in front of the fireplace. He was tall and imposing, his hands pressed together as if he were delivering a court verdict. Briar, my stepmother, lounged on the sofa with a smug smile, clearly enjoying the drama. Beside her, my stepbrother Thaddeus looked equally pleased with himself. They both seemed to feed off my discomfort, as if my grounding brought them some twisted satisfaction. After a long pause, my father finally spoke, his voice firm and unyielding. "Calliope, this isn't a negotiation. Your place in this family depends on it." The words hit me like a slap. He wasn't asking me to apologize because of any real wrongdoing. He wanted total submission. He wanted me to prove my loyalty to Briar and to this new version of our family, a family that, in his eyes, no longer included me in any meaningful way. I sat there quietly, my mind racing. How could he not see that this punishment was unfair? That his actions were cruel, using the memory of my late mother as leverage? I thought about everything I had done for this household. The mortgage payments, the bills, the hidden support for Thaddeus's failing projects. Every contribution, every effort, dismissed in a single moment. Briar's eyes sparkled with satisfaction, and Thaddeus nodded as if to emphasize my supposed guilt. I realized that apologizing would mean erasing my dignity, handing over the respect I had worked for, and allowing them to feel victorious. No amount of pleading would change their minds. My father wasn't looking for an apology. He was looking for obedience. And yet, as much as they thought they were in control, I felt a spark of defiance. I understood then that this was not just about a grounded adult or a spoiled stepmother. It was about power, control, and who truly held it in the family. I would not let this define me. That night, as I left the living room silently, I promised myself that I would find a way to turn the tables. If they wanted a battle of control, I was ready, but the victory would be mine, and it would be far beyond anything they could imagine. I worked at my father's logistics firm, or at least that's what everyone thought. They saw me in a small office, typing away at spreadsheets, answering emails, and doing a modest IT job. What they didn't know was that I had a life no one could touch. I was the CTO and co-founder of Axiom, a tech startup that was quietly changing the game. My father, Sterling, would never understand that this was where my real power came from. At home, the situation was just as frustrating. The luxury house we lived in, with its polished floors and designer furniture, was mostly funded by me. I paid the mortgage, the housekeeper, Briar's personal stylist, and even Thaddeus's fancy car lease. Everything in that house, every detail, was paid for by my hard work. And yet, no one appreciated it. I was treated like a tenant, not a daughter. Briar had already taken over, changing the house to suit her loud and flashy taste. She replaced my mother's cherished heirlooms with garish decorations that clashed with everything I loved. Walking through the rooms felt like watching my mother's memory slowly vanish. The woman who didn't even belong in our family was erasing the woman I had loved most. My father didn't care about any of it. To him, I was just a useful tool. He expected me to do what he wanted, when he wanted, without question. My ideas, my achievements, they meant nothing. Even Thaddeus acted like he deserved everything I provided. He bragged about things I paid for, acting as if they were his victories. I kept quiet most of the time. Complaining didn't help. No one in that house would see my worth unless I let them. But inside, I was angry and determined. I knew my secret, my tech company, my influence, was my power. One day, everyone would see what I really did, and they wouldn't be able to ignore it. Every day in that house reminded me of how little respect I had, how invisible my contributions were, and how shallow the family around me could be. Still, I held on to my secret life, my company, my control. That was mine, untouchable by Briar, Thaddeus, or even my father. I knew that one day, I would decide who deserved respect in my life, and it would not be anyone who had treated me like a ghost. I was done being invisible. I was done being just a utility. And one day, the world would finally see me, Not just the daughter who paid for everything, but the woman who had made everything possible. I couldn't believe what had happened. Thaddeus had completely messed up a key client, missing deadlines and ignoring emails, and now the blame somehow fell on me. Sitting in the living room, I watched Briar point a finger at me, her voice sharp and accusing. "You should have been mentoring him. You're supposed to have his back," she said, as if I had failed my stepbrother personally. Sterling didn't even look at me, nodding along as if her words were law. I wanted to scream, to tell them the truth, but I kept my calm. I had already been quietly fixing the mess behind the scenes. While they argued and pointed fingers, I had contacted the client myself, smoothing things over and ensuring their needs were met. I thought they would never find out, but that didn't matter. I had done the right thing. A few hours later, I opened my inbox and found an email from the client. They were praising me, thanking me for my careful attention and discretion, and insisting that I take full control of the account. My heart lifted for a moment. Finally, recognition for the work I had quietly carried out. This was proof that my efforts mattered, that I wasn't just some invisible helper in the background. Excited, I went straight to my father and showed him the email. I thought this would make him see how capable I was, how much I contributed. But before he could even react, Briar stepped in, blocking my attempt. Later that evening, she cornered me in the living room. Her eyes were cold, her voice low and threatening. "Delete it," she said. "Thaddeus needs that victory on his record. Your father agrees." I froze. My heart sank. She wasn't just asking me to ignore the truth. She was forcing me to erase my success so that Thaddeus could take credit. My father had agreed to this? The first real betrayal hit me hard. I realized that in this house, truth and hard work meant nothing. What mattered was appearances and Briar's control. I looked at her, anger and disbelief swirling inside me. I wanted to refuse, to stand up and say no, but I knew the fight wouldn't be easy. Even small victories in that house came with a price. Yet deep down, I knew that letting her win this time wasn't the end. I would find a way to turn the situation around, to make sure that my work and my worth could never be stolen again. For now, I deleted the email as she demanded, but the fire inside me was growing. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. By day, I pretended to be a quiet employee at my father's firm, but by night, I ran a tech empire from a sleek high-rise downtown. The lights of the city sparkled below as I moved through the glass-walled office of Axiom, surrounded by monitors, whiteboards, and the hum of innovation. This was my real world, the place where my ideas mattered, where I had control, and where I built something that no one could take from me. I had worked hard to reach this point. Axiom wasn't just a company, it was my vision, my creation. Every line of code, every product feature, every business decision had my fingerprints on it. Most people had no idea I existed in this space. To them, I was just Callie, the dutiful daughter, the office worker at a logistics firm. But in reality, I was the one holding the keys to a multimillion-dollar future. Gideon Thorne, my mentor and the CEO of Thornton Consolidated, walked into my office with a confident smile. Thornton was Sterling's dream client, the company my father had been desperate to win over for a $50 million contract. Gideon and I had built a professional bond over years of mutual respect and understanding. He trusted me, and I trusted him. "We're moving forward with the deal," Gideon said, leaning against the edge of my desk. "But there's something you need to know. Clause 7.4 of the contract makes it clear. Axiom's platform, under your direction as CTO, is non-negotiable. No one can override that, not even your father." I felt a thrill run through me. My two worlds, the obedient daughter at home and the powerful CTO downtown, were on a collision course. Sterling had no idea that the person he thought he controlled was actually the one with the real power. This clause meant that the contract he had been chasing for months depended entirely on my decision. I held the switch, and I could turn it off or on. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city. I could almost picture my father, pacing in his office, unaware that every move he was making, every strategy he thought would impress Thornton, was already in my hands. For once, the thought of having control over a situation that had always been dictated to me felt exhilarating. Gideon watched me silently, knowing I understood the weight of the moment. "Everything depends on you, Callie. You have the power to make this work, or not." I smiled quietly to myself. Finally, I wasn't just surviving in a world that tried to erase me. I was shaping it. The decision, the leverage, the future, it was all mine. My father could demand apologies, he could push me around at home, but down here, in the world I had built, I was untouchable. This was my secret, my power, and when the time came, I would use it exactly how I wanted. The collision of my two lives was coming, and I would be the one to decide how it ended. I walked into the living room and froze. Briar had placed a neat stack of papers on the coffee table, and the way she looked at me made my stomach tighten. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. "Thaddeus is starting an investment portfolio," she said, her voice cold and sharp. "It's time you contributed to your brother's future." I stared at the papers. They weren't ordinary forms. They were share transfer documents for my stake in Axiom. My stake in the company I had built from the ground up. But to them, it was just a side project, a little hobby that didn't matter. They had no idea that Axiom wasn't small, that it wasn't worthless, and that the shares on that table were worth far more than they could imagine. I looked at my father, Sterling, hoping for some recognition or support, but he just shook his head slightly and said, "It's just paper, Calliope. Family is what matters. Sign them." The words felt like a knife twisting inside me. Family? Was this family? They had no respect for what I had built, no understanding of what I had sacrificed. And now they wanted me to give it all away so Thaddeus could take credit, so Briar could feel like she had won. He handed me a strict deadline. 48 hours. Sign the papers or continue to be grounded. The grounding wasn't just punishment anymore, it was leverage. They thought they could force me into submission, make me hand over something priceless with threats and guilt. I picked up the documents, feeling the weight of every page. My mind raced. If I signed, I would lose control over everything I had worked for. If I refused, they would keep punishing me, trying to break me down until I complied. I could feel the tension in the room, Briar smirking and Thaddeus sitting there smug, thinking he had already won. But inside, I wasn't scared. I had built something stronger than their lies, stronger than their manipulation. Axiom was my creation, and they had no power over it, not truly. The papers on that table might have looked like a simple family investment to them, but to me, they were a test, and I had no intention of failing. I set the papers down carefully and looked at Briar. "You really think I'll sign this?" I asked softly, letting the question hang in the air. They had no idea that this was just the beginning. I wasn't giving up anything. Not to her, not to Thaddeus, and definitely not to my father. The next 48 hours were theirs to try, but I knew the real power was in my hands, and they were about to find out exactly who controlled it. I waited until the whole house was quiet. Everyone had gone to bed, and only one light was still on in the living room. My father was sitting there alone, staring at his phone. I stood by the doorway for a moment, trying to gather the courage to speak. This was my last chance. I told myself that maybe, just maybe, he would finally listen. I walked in slowly and sat across from him. My hands were shaking a little, but I tried to keep my voice calm. "Dad," I said softly, "can I ask you something?" He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his face already showed annoyance, as if I had interrupted something more important. I swallowed hard and asked, "Dad, do you even know what I actually do? Do you know where I go every day?" I felt exposed saying it. I wasn't asking for praise. I wasn't asking for money. I just wanted to know if he saw me, even a little. He let out a long, tired sigh, the kind people use when they think the problem is you, not the situation. "You work with computers," he said, waving his hand. "Why does it matter? You always make things big. Just stop being dramatic and fall in line for once." His words hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't anger I felt first, it was emptiness. A cold, heavy emptiness. I stared at him, hoping he would realize what he'd just said. But his face remained blank, bored, almost irritated that I had brought this up. In that moment, something inside me cracked. All these years I had worked, helped, and carried responsibilities he never even knew existed. I had paid bills he thought magically took care of themselves. I had cleaned up problems without asking for thanks. I had tried to be a good daughter. But none of that mattered to him. I was just someone he expected to obey. I realized he didn't want to understand me. He didn't want to know who I was or what I did. He didn't even care enough to ask. He just wanted control. So I nodded slowly, even though I felt like my chest was tightening. I stood up without saying another word. He didn't ask where I was going. He didn't stop me. He didn't even look up again. As I walked back to my room, I felt lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I finally saw the truth, heavier because the truth hurt more than I expected. But I also knew one thing clearly. This was the end of my trying. I had given him his final chance. And now I knew what I had to do next. The 48 hours passed faster than I expected. When the deadline finally came, the whole family gathered in the same living room where everything had started. The air felt heavy, like everyone already knew a storm was coming. I walked in quietly, and all their eyes turned toward me. My father stood near the center of the room, arms crossed, waiting like a judge about to give a sentence. Briar sat on the sofa with her usual fake concern, though I could see the excitement hiding in her eyes. Thaddeus leaned back, smirking like he already knew how this would end. They all looked so sure of themselves, so confident that I would break and obey. My father didn't waste time. "Well," he said, "it's time. Did you make your decision?" His voice was sharp, filled with expectation. He truly believed I would fold, like I always did. I took a slow breath. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind 100 times, but saying the words out loud still made my heart beat faster. "I don't have the papers," I said calmly. Briar's eyes widened a little, surprised that I wasn't holding anything. My father frowned, confused for a second. "What do you mean?" he demanded. I lifted my chin. "I won't be signing anything," I said. "And I won't be apologizing." The room went quiet. A deep, stunned silence. For the first time, they weren't sure what to say. Then everything exploded at once. My father's face turned red. He stepped forward as if he couldn't believe what he had heard. "Excuse me," he shouted. "Do you think this is a game? I gave you a simple instruction. You will not disrespect this family again." But I didn't look away. I didn't shrink. I stood there, steady, even though my hands were shaking inside. "I'm done," I said softly. "I'm done letting you control me." That was all it took for him to completely lose control. "Then get out," he roared. "Get out of my house. If you can't follow the rules, you are no daughter of mine." For a moment, everything around me froze. Those words were ones I had feared hearing my whole life. But now, as they echoed in the room, I realized they didn't break me. They freed me. Briar sat back with a slow smile spreading across her face, a smile of pure victory. She looked at me like she had finally pushed me out of the way for good. Thaddeus glanced at her, sharing the same satisfaction. I looked at each of them, one by one. They had no idea what line they had just crossed or what it would cost them. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply turned around and walked away, leaving their false victory hanging in the air behind me. They thought they had won. They had no idea the real battle had just begun. I packed my bags that same night. I didn't wait for mourning or another argument. I didn't want to hear anyone call my name or pretend they cared. I walked out of that house quietly, but inside I felt something huge shift. For the first time in years, I could breathe. I wasn't trapped in their rules anymore. I wasn't carrying their moods or their demands. I was finally free. I drove to my apartment in the city, the one no one in that house cared to know about. It was small, simple, but it was mine. When I stepped inside, I felt safe. I sat on the floor for a long moment, letting the silence wrap around me. No orders. No shouting. No pressure. Just peace. The next morning, I went straight to Axiom's boardroom. Gideon was already there, waiting for me. The board members looked surprised to see me walk in with a different kind of confidence. I explained everything clearly, how my family tried to take my shares, how they threatened me, how they tried to use control and emotional tricks to push me into handing over what I had built. I presented the documents they gave me and the messages pressuring me to sign. No one interrupted. No one questioned me. They all listened. Gideon's face was serious, almost cold. "Good," he said when I finished. "Now we protect you properly." And they did. Within hours, Axiom's legal team secured my ownership and locked everything behind new protections. I felt lighter knowing they were behind me, not trying to use me. But that wasn't the end. My father kept calling. At first, he was angry, shouting into the phone about disrespect and family. Then his tone changed. He tried to act calm, as if we simply had a misunderstanding. I didn't answer any of those calls. I knew better than to fall for that. One evening, I finally picked up, but only because I needed proof. I pressed record before speaking. His voice came through, full of fake authority. He talked like nothing had happened, as if kicking me out was a small issue. Then he switched to bragging. He told me about the sure-thing $50 million deal he was about to close with Thornton Consolidated. He sounded proud, excited, confident. He had no idea what he was revealing. He had no idea who controlled the contract. He had no idea my signature was the key to everything he was celebrating. I stayed silent as he talked, letting him dig his own grave. He thought he was intimidating me into coming back home, but all he did was show how blind he was to the truth. When the call ended, I saved the recording. I finally felt the last piece of the chain fall away. They had thrown me out of their home. Now they were about to lose everything they thought they controlled. The conference room at Thornton Consolidated looked like something out of a magazine. Shiny floor, long glass table, huge windows showing the whole city. When I stepped inside quietly, unnoticed at first, I could see my father, Briar, and Thaddeus already seated on the other side of the room. They looked confident, almost glowing with pride. Briar kept fixing her hair. Thaddeus was straightening his tie like he was the star of the day. And my father, he was smiling in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. He truly believed he had won. They didn't know their victory existed only in their imagination. The executives from Thornton Consolidated entered, and Gideon took his place at the head of the table. He carried himself calmly, but I knew that calm hit a very sharp edge. My father didn't notice any of that. He only saw the golden door he thought he was about to walk through. The meeting began with small talk, handshakes, and fake compliments. Then Gideon opened the folder containing the contract. My father leaned forward eagerly as Gideon turned the pages. When Gideon pointed to the final page, my father reached for the pen immediately, ready to sign and secure the $50 million deal. But before the pen even touched the paper, Gideon lifted his hand. "Sterling," he said slowly, "before we proceed, we need to address Clause 7.4. My father paused, confused. "Clause what?" Gideon folded his hands on the table. "Clause 7.4 requires the authorization of my technology partner. We can't finalize this contract without the CTO of Axiom signing off." Then he looked around the room. "Where is Calliope Vance?" Everything went silent. Briar froze with her smile halfway formed. Thaddeus's confidence drained from his face in seconds. My father looked like he had forgotten how to breathe. He blinked rapidly and shook his head. "There must be a mistake," he began, his voice thin and shaky. "Calliope has nothing to do with." But he couldn't even finish the sentence, because everyone in the room could hear the fear in his voice. Gideon didn't argue. He didn't raise his tone. He simply said, "Sterling, this deal cannot continue without her." The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. My father looked around, as if hoping I would magically appear and save him. The same daughter he threw out of his house without hesitation. He had no idea I was standing just outside the doorway, watching him crumble under the weight of a truth he refused to see. The one person he tried to control, the one person he pushed out, was the only person who could save him now. And I wasn't stepping in to rescue him. The boardroom doors swung open, and every head turned toward me. I walked in slowly, not rushed, not nervous, just steady and sure. I wasn't the scared daughter they tried to control in that living room. I wasn't the one begging to be seen or heard. I was the woman who finally understood her own worth. My father's face changed the moment he saw me. His confidence collapsed in seconds. His eyes widened and his mouth opened slightly, as if he couldn't believe I was really there. Briar stiffened in her chair, and Thaddeus sank into his seat like he wished he could disappear. I stopped at the end of the table and looked straight at my father. For the first time, he didn't have any power over me. I held a single sheet of paper in my hand. I raised it slightly so he could see it clearly. "You were right, Dad," I said softly. "It was just paper." He swallowed hard, already sensing what was coming, but too late to stop it. "This," I continued, holding the page with a steady hand, "is Axiom's formal notice of withdrawal from the partnership." I let the words settle in the room before adding, "The deal is void." No shouting. No insults. No revenge speech. Just truth. Silence filled the entire boardroom. The executives stared in shock. Gideon leaned back calmly, watching the moment play out exactly as expected. My father looked like someone had pulled the ground out from under him. Briar clutched his arm, her smile completely gone. Thaddeus looked sick. I didn't stay to watch them argue or panic. I didn't know them that. I didn't know them anything. I turned around and walked out, leaving the paper on the table behind me. Every step felt lighter, like I was leaving years of pain on the other side of those doors. As I walked through the hallway, I could already hear voices rising in the boardroom. Panic, confusion, disbelief. But none of it touched me anymore. Outside the building, the sun felt warmer. The air felt cleaner. I felt like I finally stepped into my real life, a life where I was in control, not trapped under someone else's commands. Behind me, the $50 million deal collapsed completely. My father's pride, Briar's schemes, and Thaddeus's expectations all fell apart in public, with powerful people watching. Their betrayal had consequences, far bigger than they ever imagined. And I didn't look back even once.